also now bring in our guests who are joining us to take this discussion forward. We have Eran Wickramaratne, MP, Democratic Socialist Republic and former State Minister of Finance. And we also have another Sri Lankan MP, Dayasiri Jayasekara. Good to have both of you on the broadcast with us. Dayasiri, Jayasekara, let me begin with you first. What did you make of this midnight clampdown on protesters? Protesters who had already said that they will vacate the areas, who had already moved away. Isn't this going to be counterproductive as far as the administration is concerned?
Very unfortunate incident because as soon as the acting president was president by the majority of the parliament, and he assumed duties yesterday, and at night, all these protesters, they have promised that they are willing to go out of this place and vacate this place and finish their protest campaign and wanted to leave this place. But what happened was, last night, suddenly, army and police, thousands of policemen and army came there and, hammered and charges to all protesters who were there. And I think they have some journalists were also hammered by the police and army. It is actually a violation of civic rights because they didn't harm anything.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the larger question, that they weren't harming anybody, and these were protesters who had already said that they will vacate the areas. And if you want some sort of stability for the region, I'm just failing to understand how is this going to get you any sort of a clear chapter as a way forward. But Eran, I want to bring you in. What did you make of this clampdown that we saw by the administration? As I said when I started this segment, many were actually anticipating this because there was a lot of anger against Ranil Wickramaratne. He was seen somebody close to the Rajapaksha, so the protesters didn't want him either. So was this then on expected lines?
Yeah, I must say this, that we did not support Ranil Wickramaratne because we ran our own candidate for president. But unfortunately, we did not have sufficient support in parliament for our candidate because we wanted to unify the whole of the opposition and all the parties, because we felt that that would probably give more political stability, which is immediately needed, right? But then Ranil Wickramaratne emerged with a clear majority to be the president. So he has come through a constitutional process. Certainly that doesn't reflect the feeling in the country, and the question about though it's legal, the legitimacy of parliament itself, because parliament was elected 2 years ago and probably doesn't reflect now the mandate of the people. So clearly there's a problem. Now, having got there as president, this incidents that we have seen is deplorable. There was no necessary for the use of force. And as it has been said, the protesters were going to vacate and they were going to provide the space for the new government to actually deliver on the economic issues, the pressing issues, and also on the democracy, human rights, governance issues that the protesters were raising. So this is totally uncalled for. It is to be completely it's deplorable that force has been used.
We haven't heard a statement. Here I'm trying to understand, the concerns of the people were for all of us to see. There's inflation, there's an economic turmoil, daily essential items have become a luxury. Rather than having a game plan of how to tackle those immediate challenges or to give some sort of reassurance to the common people, the first action that we see by the new president is a clampdown. How will that ensure that he doesn't see these protests only escalate? We've seen the power of protest, which led to the likes of Gotabaya Rajapaksa being forced not just to flee the island nation, but eventually having to step down. Isn't that a fear that is valid, or that should be a fear that should be valid for Ranil Wickramaratne as well?
Yes, so that certainly the protest is something that clearly they can't ignore. The protest has been successful, it's achieved its goal, right? And the question now is, how does the country move forward? For the country to move forward, ultimately, we need to have an election. When I say this, lots of people try to, put that aside and say, well, how can you hold an election? I think that if we want a democratic way of life and democratic process, right, if Parliament has lost its legitimacy, the only way forward is actually to have an election. So the question was, how do you stabilize for an election? You see, and we just use the constitutional process. All transitions must be within the legal and constitutional process. If we don't think of it like that, then this country could just deteriorate into chaos. And therefore, it has to be like that. So what has happened, right, is deplorable. And the government should have been sensitive to that. It was totally uncalled for. And this will lead to further destabilization. We are waiting to hear a statement from the new president or the government as to why this happened and who is responsible for this. Because that's one way forward. And then immediately a dialogue could begin between the protesters and the government. Otherwise, things will deteriorate even further.
Yeah. Dayasiri, I want to bring you back in, and I agree with what Eran is saying. The situation is already so fragile. If you continue with this clampdown, then any possibility of any sort of a dialogue that could happen between the protesters and the administration, that won't be a possibility also. So I want to understand, what do you think was the rationale, considering the fact, as we said, these protesters had already said that we will vacate the designated areas. They wanted to give the administration a chance to, get some sort of stability back. Then why use force?
Yeah, so that is why there is no rationale.
Yeah, that is the problem, because they have promised that they are going to vacate this place today after 12 o'clock. So I can't imagine, because these are orders of the appointed president. He has to take the responsibility for this, because actually these people are not violating anything, but they had this protest for last 102 days, all 3 months' time. But as soon as the president assumed duties as a president, he ordered to, I think, the police and the army to, clear all these places.
And then I want to bring you back in. We've seen multiple reactions.